Final hour OverDrive continues, brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Bryan Hayes, Jonas Siegel of The Athletic. Leafs and Raptors both in action tonight. Bunch of games in the NBA, bunch of games in the NHL tonight. And Austin Matthews at 51, scores 2 last night. Mitch Marner had a couple of assists. He's had, I believe, 2+ assists in every game for 5 straight. The two of them are connecting at a crazy level. William Nylander scores 2 last night. I wanted to ask you because, like him hitting 30 last night, that's a big number.
Sure it is.
That's a milestone for generally everyone else in the league.
Yeah. His career high is 37.
Right.
Or 40, sorry, 40.
He hit 40 last year, I believe it was.
37 the year before.
Yeah, and like 30, he's done it before. It's not like it's some, massive celebration for William Nylander, but he has, what do they have, 26 games left, I believe. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility he could score 19 goals in 26 games. It's unlikely, but...
In which case, he would get to 50 as well?
Right. And, I think at a minimum, you're looking at a career high for him, like 10 more goals in the next 26 games, and he pushes up to 41, maybe to 45. I think he's on pace for 45 or 46 goals right now. But... that's kind of being lost in the shuffle here. Naturally, Austin Matthews is taking up all the oxygen to the point where even the Bobby McMahon story, which is really cool, he scores again last night, is such a side story because of the kind of freak of nature type action that Matthews is supplying every single night.
Reminded me of something, though, that we should probably talk about. We think ahead to the playoffs, and we were talking about it before, the issues that they've had at times scoring goals. How many guys can you count on to score goals in the playoffs with this team? Because like we've talked about Tavares now kind of stepping back a little bit, like not the player he was. He's had issues, obviously, scoring in the playoffs before. Are those like kind of the only 2 guys you can look at and be like, I think those guys will score? Because everyone else, it's like, maybe. Like, Marner obviously hasn't scored a ton in the playoffs. Bertuzzi doesn't have a lot of playoff history. He scored for
Did
Boston.
score last year.
Bunch on the power play, but scored.
Max has scored a little bit in his playoff career. Yeah.
But it's like you look up the lineup and you're like, I don't know.
Right. Now, I would suggest that probably applies to basically every team. Like you get to a point where, like in Edmonton, Warren Foegele scored again a couple of times last night. Does that mean he definitely scores 8 goals in the playoffs this year? I don't think so. He could.
Yeah, fair.
And I've said that a couple of times recently, like with Bobby McMahon, is he peaking just at the wrong time here? Where, again, we have a tendency to talk about players who are having an impact right now and fold it into this, like, where do they fit with the 5-year plan? Doesn't have to be who cares where he is in 5 years? Yeah. Who cares where Benoit is in 5 years? Can you do something for the next, 4 months?
Sure.
That's the only thing that matters. And with Bobby McMahon being an example of that, I can't give you, he obviously has no NHL Stanley Cup playoff history, none. Could he score 3 goals in the first round? Maybe he does. Yeah. Maybe he does. Bertuzzi, Domi, I think you're hoping, and I believe they will be playoff performers. Morgan Riley last year, look at the goals he scored in the playoffs.
Yeah, he was their best player.
Yes. I think you can bank on offense out of him. I don't think really anyone else on the back end is going to supply much offense. But David Kampf a couple of years ago actually scored goals in the playoffs.
Yes, he did. Last year he scored a couple goals.
Right. Like, it's largely unpredictable once you get to the depth players anyway. I don't think it's any different here than it really is in other markets.
Yeah, but it's just because it's been an issue every year. And obviously a big part of it is, like we've talked about, you need your stars to actually deliver.
It's compounded by the fact that
has to happen.
Matthews literally didn't score in the second round.
Yes.
Like, that can never happen again.
Maybe you win the series.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just something like you think of, like, people that they could trade for, and I think they need a center. But, like, you could also make a case, well, maybe you just get a better forward. Like, you get a forward, a winger who can score. And maybe you don't worry so much, like, about if we can't get a center, just get someone who can help put the puck in the net.
Yeah.
Because, they might be wrong. Like, you might, like, this Bertuzzi thing, like, this just might be who he is.
It could be. Yeah, and there may not be a light that goes off.
And then you just don't really have, like, a secondary kind of wave. And, like, you're right, maybe most teams are just that way.
Well, and if you look at the trade bait board up on tsn.ca, there is not really a center that pops.
Well, like I like Adam Henrique.
Henrique's okay.
He's older. Yeah, like you're right.
He's okay.
He's not Ryan O'Reilly. Well,
no.
Yeah, like he's not Ryan
Not
O'Reilly.
even close to Ryan O'Reilly.
Right.
And O'Reilly scored in big goals and really contributed in that first round. and then got hurt. And I think, obviously slowed down. But, you got Scott Lawton. I don't know. Like,
he's a fourth line center.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not, unless there's another team out there or another player that we're not aware of. And again, if there is, and he's an impact guy, that's going to cost a lot.
Yeah.
Which you got to pick your poison. Like, where are you going to put your assets?
Yeah.
Here's Pierre LeBrun, our TSN Hockey Insider. What's happening, Pierre?
Ho ho! 8-year anniversary, and of course, I knew this would happen. Mike Johnson retweeted a tweet from someone who talked about the highlights and my creaking chair from several years ago. Like, have we just turned the page?
We're 8 years older. It doesn't mean we're more mature. We're not more mature. If anything, we're even more immature, Pierre. You should know that. There it is. There's the little sound. Yeah, what are you going to do, man? You knew. I don't know if you knew in the moment, but that was one of those clips that was going to go viral quickly.
And again, confirm or deny, I'm denying.
Yes, of course you're denying. It's still an allegation, but there was a chair. There was chair movement. I think there it is. We keep playing it. Is that not? That's just the phone. That's not you playing something, JP. I thought that was something that we were actually personally manufacturing, but we're not. I think Andy might have sewered you there too, Pierre. I think Andy got in on that, Andy Petrillo. But it's good to have you. And we were like, are you studying the Trade Bait board? I know you're heavily affiliated with it, and you and the other insiders are putting a lot of work into it, but. Is it a scenario where it's moving like daily, hourly? Take us through the process of creating the 50-player list that was reestablished a couple of days ago.
Yeah, well, you're asking the wrong guy. That's Chris Johnson's job. And
okay.
In fact, he has to do it for both TSN and the Athletic. So
nice.
So that's yeah. No, obviously he obviously bounces a lot of stuff off Dregs and I for sure. For the Trade Bait board on TSN as he should. So, and that's the process. What I find fascinating is there are always players who end up getting dealt that were never on the board, and that's no one's fault. It's because there are calls that come in the last 2 days on things that the team themselves that ends up trading this player never thought they would move him. And that's always the part that I look forward to is the name that we haven't talked about. And, part of the issue, I was just talking to a team about this today, but part of the issue today is that the contenders, the higher contenders are waiting for some of the teams to declare. Now the Penguins kind of did yesterday with Kyle Dubas' news conference, although they haven't given up on the playoff race, but there are a lot of teams that are hanging in there. In fact, I talked about one of these teams on Insider Trading, which is airing shortly. But the Washington Capitals don't want to sell yet. They just won a couple big games. They're still just on the periphery of it. They want to give their team every chance possible, and then wait closer to March 8th before they decide that they need to sell. And they have some interesting pieces. Max Pacioretty. Joel Edmondson, it's funny. I was thinking of the Leafs today with Joel Edmondson. As it is, he's already at $1.7 million because the Habs cut his salary in half last summer, and the Capitals would be ready to cut that back in half to a $900,000 player at the deadline. And he's not a top 4 guy anymore. Of course, he's aged, but as your 5, 6, 7, the guy who's won a cup, and a $900 cap it, $900,000 cap it. Those are the type of deals that I find intriguing that can come back and really help a team. And it's really not a guy we're talking about right now.
And he's 6'5" every night, Pierre, which is what you need around here, and what we were talking about a lot. And one guy we were talking about before, who I'm sure you're probably sick of talking about this guy, but I have to ask you anyway. Do the Calgary Flames think that they can get a first-round pick for Chris Tanev, or is that just like a dream, and we're going to wait until the last day, and if not, we'll just take the next best offer? Do they think it's possible? Because we've seen defensemen like him, defensemen even not as good as him, fetch a first-round pick before.
Well, they certainly hope they can, and that's the holdup really on why he hasn't been dealt yet. I've made a number of calls again on that the last couple of days, and there are a dozen teams that have reached out to Calgary and Chris Tanev. You would think out of a dozen calls that someone would put their hand up and say, I'm willing to go to a first, but it obviously hasn't happened yet. There are some decent offers, I believe, on the table for Tanev that don't involve a first. But I think the double-edged sword for Calgary right now is how long can we wait to see if the offer gets better. But the flip side is you're talking about one of the NHL's premier shot blockers, and he's not just a shot blocker; he's a playoff warrior. But I think the Flames front office is probably holding their breath every night he plays right now. Because of the way he plays. What you love about Chris Tanev is literally what you rolling your breath about when you're trying to get the most for him in a trade. But the other thing I would say, and the Leafs have had repeated calls, my understanding is with the Flames on Chris Tanev since the start of the season and certainly of late. But of the kind of conversations / offers that the Flames have had, I was told today by someone that the Leafs probably wouldn't rank top 3 on that list right now.
Well, what can they offer? Like, they don't have a second. They don't, like, they obviously don't want to trade their first. So it's like they have 1/3. Like, what is it, a prospect? Like, what do you offer?
They could offer a second in 2027, but that kid's 13 years old right now.
Crazy. That's the reality.
Well,
thanks, Dubas.
So, yeah, they are hamstrung that way. I mean, I think, well, you know what they can offer, Jonas, to answer your question. You know what the Flames have communicated to the Leafs. If you want Chris Tanev now, it's your first.
Yeah, he's there.
So
just
that's
take it.
to answer your question.
But they don't want to do that. So if I'm Craig Conroy, I'm like, okay, well, what are you giving me? Like, what is your best offer? And I look at it and I think about it and I'm like, well, I don't know what it is.
Well, shouldn't the chat more be like, if the Leafs have determined he's not worth a first, then go somewhere else?
Yes.
Like, why does it have to be Tanev?
Yes.
I mean, it's not like Brad Gilligan's only phoning Calgary every day.
Exactly.
Our sense is that he checked in a few times on Labushkin and Anaheim.
That's a good one.
Still on Carrier. He's phoned Philly on Walker. Like, the Leafs are not just sitting there on one target. Of course not. They're calling around, no doubt about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, Calgary seems to be the team that people are focused on. I'm curious if you think there's a chance that a team that is not, flooding the trade bait board right now could shock the world in the next week and a half. To give you an example, and not, these are my words, not yours, but could Seattle in a week say, "What are we doing here? Why aren't we trading pieces?"
Sure.
Minnesota, could that happen?
Minnesota really doesn't have that much to move,
right.
Brian. I mean, even if they declare themselves sellers, I guess because he's a future Hall of Famer, what Marc-Andre Fleury ends up deciding could be intriguing from the point of view of who he is and how much people care about him and his career. But he would probably go somewhere to start off as a backup, to be fair. Although, I'd love to have him on my team if I was a cup contender. Seattle is the team that you mentioned first that has the ability to inject some fireworks in the trade deadline, because they've got a number of interesting players that teams are calling on, and the Kraken have been wanting to stay in the race. It's kind of similar to Washington, right? Like we just talked about. But Jordan Eberle is absolutely on a list, a handful of names on the Edmonton Oilers winger list in terms of their wish list. There's some pieces there for sure. But it's not unimportant for the Kraken to stay in the race as long as they can, right? They're always getting compared to Vegas because they're expansion cousins. It was huge for Seattle last year to win a playoff round. All those things are important. That they're not, like, we tend to see it a bit more surgically without emotion, because it's like, what are you guys doing? Just sell. Well, they're trying to sell tickets in their market, and that's important. But, Alex Wenberg is a pending UFA if Seattle decides to sell.
There's a
Justin
center.
Schultz.
I like Alex Wenberg.
Yeah, Justin Schultz on defense. And that's just the pending UFAs. I mean, it's automatically where I go with my attention span, because that's primarily who gets moved at this time of year. But they could certainly listen on other guys too. And, Nashville's interesting too. The Predators remain in the race against most predictions, I would say, from the preseason, because they unloaded so many players. But the Predators have several pending UFAs, not big names, but guys I know from talking to other teams that are on lists, and they're just waiting for Nashville to say, okay, we're out of it now. And Nashville hasn't said that yet, but Carrier is certainly one of them. Like I said, the Leafs have checked in with Nashville on him. But, the Predators could be pretty busy if they fall out of it closer to March 8th. I mean, Yakov Trenin is a player. I know a couple teams have noted on their list. Novak, of course, Tyson Berry, who asked for a change of scenery, and that's still in play. And like I said, Carrier, and of course, the other big one, Juuse Saros. The Predators have dangled him in the sense of knock our socks off completely if you want our attention. And my understanding is no one's done that. No one has been willing to enter the orbit of where the Predators need that conversation to be for them to entertain trading Saros. And, for those listening wondering, why the heck would Nashville want to trade Juuse Saros when it's so hard to know what a good goalie is these days? It's because they got a guy coming that they absolutely love, too, in Askarov. Love. And he's having a great year in Milwaukee. But I was also told today that the Preds can live with a bit of an overlap where it's Saros and Askarov maybe for a year or two together. And that's a pretty good 1-2 punch.
Yeah, the Saros one, he was number 50 on the list. He had Markstrom in the top 5. And like you mentioned, CJ is the one that's kind of operating this. But those are two really good goalies. And like you said, no one's knocked their socks off in Nashville. And yet all season we've talked about it in Jersey and Carolina and other spots. It's like Jersey is really intriguing to me because they had really high expectations this year, yet they're out of the playoffs. If they don't go and pay the price for a Saros or for a Markstrom, is that them conceding that they're punting? Are they just saying this isn't our year? Because I don't know how I could reason with that if I'm Tom Fitzgerald, the GM down there. How are you explaining to fans that you're 4 points out of the playoffs and it's absurd the goaltending you've gotten this year? And you have two guys who could potentially be available who are really good goalies and on term for another year, and you're not going to pull the trigger. Right. How could they possibly reason with not making that trade?
Well, on the Saros one, I'm sure if Fitzgerald shared with his fan base what the Predators would probably want, most Devils fans wouldn't be sure whether they would want him to do that trade. We're talking super high price here for Saros.
Okay.
But the Markstrom deal is there. There were some serious talks about 10 days ago between the two teams. It fell apart. What we were told is it fell apart based on it being contentious of how much money the Flames would be willing to retain on Markstrom's deal, which is not nothing. There's 2.5 years left on it, right, at $6 million. And if the Flames are willing to retain on it, what is that worth asset-wise on its own? Remember, bring it back to the Leafs all the time, but the Leafs have to give Carolina a first-round pick to take Patrick Marleau's remaining contract, which became Seth Jarvis, by the way. But my point is that's why that deal. Everyone's like, well, Markstrom to New Jersey is the most automatic fit alive. I agree, but what does it cost to eat some of that deal? It should cost a lot, and I don't know that the Devils and the Flames can get on the same page on that. I don't know even if they can resuscitate those conversations. But to me, that's the most obvious ad for sure is Markstrom to New Jersey at this point. Because the reason it makes sense for the Devils is that it whether they make the playoffs or not this year, of course they want to make it. But Markstrom signed for another 2 years. You've actually finally solved your goaltending beyond this year, which would be huge if you're New Jersey and you're healthier next year and you have all your players. The other thing to remember with New Jersey, by the way, they have Dougie Hamilton's $9.5 million cap hit to play with at the deadline because Hamilton's not coming back to the playoffs if they make them. So, they've got the kind of flexibility cap-wise that a lot of contenders don't have right now.
Well, Pierre, you mentioned the Penguins, and I'm really curious, if you had to guess, what is the plan here? Obviously Kyle Dubas gets a 7-year deal. The contracts they have are just really difficult. A lot of them, they're long. He mentioned that they need to get younger, but a lot of the players that they have are older and signed. Mm-hmm. I don't really understand how they're going to Houdini their way out of this thing long term. Because if you're building around Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Karlsson, those guys are already 37, 38. They're signed forever. What do you think they're doing here?
Well, I thought Kyle Dubas shed some light on it yesterday, even though, GM speak at news conferences, you have to kind of read in between the lines a bit. But it's really the first time that it's come out and he has said publicly, it's time for us to get younger here. He's not said that before. So I think he's getting his market ready for some difficult decisions. One of them is trading Jake Gensel, I think. that's more obvious. But I think, I mentioned this on Insider Trading a couple of days ago. I think they would move Riley Smith, who has another year on his deal. They're listening on pretty much their entire roster now, except the core guys.
But I don't understand. Like, what's the way out?
Well, the way out is that they're trying to do what's probably the most difficult thing to do, and frankly, so is Washington in some ways, and those two teams are always going to be tied to the hip in some ways, is they're trying to – Washington started a year ago at the deadline, as you guys remember, but both teams are going to try to retool without rebuilding around their legacy guys.
Oh, man.
That's what's happening, and it's hard.
That's hard.
And there's no guarantee it's going to work. That's the problem. And I would say this, remind everyone listening again, that's why Kyle Dubas was really smart to get a 7-year deal and not a 5-year deal as the guy running that program, because I think this is going to be tough to pull off. And again, he stressed yesterday that Sidney Crosby would be part of whatever emerges on the other side of this thing, that they want Sidney Crosby around for, Penguins 2.0 under Dubas. So that's significant too. Going back to Brian Hayes trying to get Sidney Crosby traded.
Yeah, he's got to get out. He's got to get out.
So Kyle Dubas addressed you directly, Brian, in that news conference.
Well, I appreciate that. He should. He didn't when he was up here in Toronto. It's funny. He probably is actually doing that now that he's in Pitt. But I get it. I get it. I understand. And Sid's, I know he's loyal. I know he wants to be there. I just don't understand how that's possibly going to work with him in 3 years, 4 years.
Like how?
Yeah, exactly. Like, great.
They're not going to get better. Like, Malkin's not going to get better. Letang's not getting better.
Right, and neither will Sid, sadly. I mean, Father Time is undefeated for a reason. He's having a magical season this year. I think next year he'll be great again, but I don't think the team will be. So, great. You got a 3-4 year plan, and Sid's 40 and on the third line. What is that? Is it still Sid's team at that point? I'm not sure. I guess that's really the question. Yes, Sid's going to be a part of it, but how can it be his team if he's going to be like 40 at that point, if you're being realistic when they can turn this around?
And the other thing, no matter what anyone says, is, and even if it's just to say here's an extension, there does have to be a pretty important conversation this summer with Crosby entering the final year of his deal. Yeah. I mean, it may just be to reaffirm that everyone wants to stay together, but those conversations sometimes can be interesting, depending on how this year ends, I guess is what I would say.
Well, in reality, Sid's probably going to have to take a big discount because of the cap issues that they have. And he's taken a discount for the better part of a decade, basically his whole career. Yeah.
Has he ever?
You might have to Bergeron that and say, fine, give me $2 million and spend the money wherever else you can to help me win here. I think that's probably going to have to be a part of the conversation. So we'll see. All right, Pierre, we'll leave it there. Thank you, buddy.
Right on.
Accumulated.
Uh-oh, we had to play that on the way out. JP, that's greasy. That's uncalled for.
Deny.
Not a confirm or deny it. Deny. Thank you, Pierre.
See you guys.
Pierre LeBrun, our TSN Hockey Insider. That was back on Leafs Lunch. I think Andy and was MJ on the show that day? I think it was Andy and MJ, and they were talking to Pierre, and there was a chair malfunction. We debated whether or not it was a malfunction. And, it happens. Again, we're older. We're not more mature. We can all concede that. But
you're
anyway.
right. Like, I just don't understand how it's supposed to get better.
Yeah, I mean, I
wonder what he went into those meetings in the summer and said, like, the plan was. Because I just don't. Like, Karlsson has 3 more years at 10.
Mm-hmm.
Malkin has 2 more years at 6.1. Letang is 4 more years at 6.1. Like, I don't
look at Rust and Raquel have 5 years.
Right?
They got 4 after
Graves
this.
Is signed a long time. Like,
no, it's a mess. That's why, again, I think like the cold hard facts are that Sid would be staying there simply because he's comfortable there, and ideally they win. But I think I just don't believe in the back of his mind he actually thinks it can happen.
Oh, can it?
Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me a little bit of...
They're going to say the right things. I'm here for, I want to win, and I'm going to... It's not going to happen. So it's almost like I'd almost prefer, in a way, it just being like, shut it down. I'm not going anywhere. Even if we lose, I'm going to be here. It's like, okay, then we'll accept that, and we'll celebrate your final 3 or 4 years in Pitt.
Maybe you'll get that this summer. He'll just sign an extension, and that will be the end of it.
Sounds like what's going to happen. And it's just done, and I'll bet you he'll sign a 3-year deal at whatever money, and it's like... this is it, and that's my retirement tour, and I'm out of here, and hopefully things break their way. I'm pulling for him. That'd be great, but...
Well, looking back, it looks like it was a mistake to sign those other guys to those contracts. Like, I think it is a mistake. But there's also like a real sentimental value of like having those guys who've won you cups stick around, and like you don't want them to go elsewhere.
Absolutely. It's incredibly difficult.
In hindsight, do you think it was the wrong thing? Because like it's really boxed them in.
Well, you're talking about Malkin and Letang in particular.
That's it.
Yeah.
And obviously trading for Karlsson is a big swing, and like doesn't look like it's going to pay off. But
right. I mean, them missing the playoffs is not a good first impression, right? It's not Karlsson's fault.
No, but it's
you swung and you missed in terms of the big picture, and it's very difficult to do because again, Sid's involved in that,
right?
Like Sid doesn't want to see Gino go, he doesn't want to see Letang go. It's incredibly difficult to do because they've been together for 18, 19 years. They've all played together every single year for like 19 years. They're all getting their numbers retired. They're all getting, I don't know about statues. Like Sid will have one. Gino probably should. Letang probably shouldn't be far behind. Maybe all three.
Maybe the three.
So how do you pick one or both and say you guys are out? Very tough to do. Yet in hindsight, I think the answer probably would have been 2 or 3 years ago. It's all about Sid. Everyone else is gone.
It's a little like they probably should have done what Tampa is doing right now with Stamkos, where we're going to see, and basically it seems like they're saying if we're going to re-sign him, it's not going to be for anything big, right? It's going to be for half, right? 4 or 5, I don't know. Like, what's Stamkos' next contract? Something like that.
Well, I mean, he's 33.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, he's not getting an 8-year deal.
No.
But I would assume he'd be asking for 4 or 5 years of security and decent money still. Yeah, these are sticking points. It's very difficult to do. And there's another guy, captain, multiple Cubs, greatest player in franchise history, beloved by the market, not a historically hockey market, so they attach themselves to like the main guys. Stamkos is the definition of that. Be tough. Raptors in action tonight. Josh Lewenberg coming up. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2. All right, Leafs and Raptors in action tonight. The NBA resuming the unofficial second half. The All-Star game, it's pretty late in the season. The Raptors only have 27 games left. 5 games out of a play-in position. It's not going to happen. Like, I think we can all concede.
Pining for them to get into the play-in tournament?
I would prefer that. I would prefer a great run, growth, get in, just get rid of the pick, fine, take it, San Antonio, then all of a sudden it's out of the lottery. I would prefer that, but it's not going to happen. Like, I'm not bracing for that at all. And, we were discussing last hour, like, how would we define a successful stretch run here for the Raps? And I think the guy that hopefully will have that answer is our Raptors reporter. Here's Josh Lewenberg. How you doing, Josh?
Good, guys. How's it going?
We're doing well. How would you define that question? What is a successful stretch run here for the Raptors?
Yeah, I mean, Darko was talking about making a race for the play-in yesterday as well. And, I mean, I do think, like, internally that should be the goal. And at least that's a tangible way for them, anyway, of showing that growth and that improvement is saying, okay, well, if they are able to make that push, make that run, then they have improved in the way that they want to. Again, it's unlikely, and I think even beyond that, the more important thing coming out of this season, and we said this going into the year, and it's more true now than it was 3 or 4 months ago, is the development of Scottie Barnes is going to determine how successful this season is. And now certainly with Siakam and Anunoby gone and the direction very clear building around Scottie, like, he's got to take that next step. He has taken a big step already this year, which is obviously encouraging. But from here, like, the goal anyway is to get him ready for this role that has been thrust upon him here that clearly at 22 years old, he's not yet ready for, but that's okay. That's fine. That's expected. The goal is to get him ready for that job, for that position as the face of the franchise, the leader of this team, a job that I think at times he's shown that he's capable of. And then at other points, and obviously the San Antonio game stands out here, at other points he's shown that he's not yet ready for it. So, yeah, it's such an all-encompassing role on and off the court that he's got to go through it. The ups and downs, and there's going to be rough moments where he's going up against the other team's best defender and he gets shut down, or He's on the top of the other team's scouting report and obviously has to deal with the difficulties and the challenges of that. And then even the off-court stuff, because we've seen that as well. The leadership and talking to the media every day, which is not something he's used to or especially enjoys, but he's going to have to get used to all of that and learn from it. And if at the end of the season he's further along in that process, then I think we look back at it and say, all right, this is successful for what is essentially year one of a rebuild.
Well, Josh, what do you think the next steps for him are on the court in terms of making that growth into, I don't know, franchise player or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I mean, I think consistency is the biggest thing because, as I said, like there are some games where he shows it, where like not only is the effort there, and I think that's a big thing with Scottie too, right? And we saw it a lot last year where there are games or even just quarters where the effort isn't where it needs to be, and for a player like that, like it's really, really noticeable. So I think he's been a lot better this year in terms of like consistency of effort, but now that there's nowhere to hide, he doesn't have Pascal Siakam to defer to offensively. He doesn't have OG Anunoby to take the other team's best player defensively. All of that is on him. There's nowhere to hide. There's no nights off. So I think in that sense, consistency is key. And then I'm really interested. We're talking a lot about Scottie here, but of course, like the evolution and development of Immanuel Quickley, who's probably number 2 on this roster in terms of guys that they're planning to build around. That's got to come too. And so much of that, I think, is joined. Like they need to develop chemistry together. For Quickley, it's about also in a very different role than what he was used to in New York, learning to be a lead guard and playing alongside Scottie. I think that, like, to me, it's still early and they haven't had a ton of reps together, but the chemistry between those two hasn't looked great yet. Like, I think Quickley's looked pretty good next to Jakob Poeltl, but those two need to develop the chemistry to the point that you feel really good about them being 1 and 2 going forward for this franchise, which I'm not sure you feel great about right now.
No, I agree with that. Raptors Nets tonight. Josh Lewenberg, our Raptors reporter. The starters, have been announced here. You got R.J. Barrett, Scottie Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, Gary Trent, and Immanuel Quickley. Yeah, I think, we discussed that last hour. Like, Quickley's been, I think he's been okay. Like, I don't think he's been great. I think he's had his moments. But he's learning. He's a young guy. This is a big moment for him in his career, right? And he's restricted at the end of the year. I saw some article online over the weekend suggesting all these other teams are going to come after Quickley, and it's like the Raptors will control that. The Raptors are likely going to find a way to, get a deal done, I would assume. If not, they'll match whatever they have to. But like, what have you made of his transition and him being around the team? And, you talked about Scottie and being in the spotlight and him being a leader. And if Quickley's going to be basically the number 2 guy or certainly one of the 2 or 3, he's got to take on a role like that as well. Have you picked up on his comfort level at all early into his tenure here in Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen similar to Scottie, some ups and downs there, and not unlike Scottie, like the ups are expected and the downs have been expected too, in the sense that, like, he is learning how to be not only a starting guard in the NBA, having come off the bench for most of his career in New York, but also like a lead guard, because that's a very different role than what he was playing in New York too. He was essentially a combo guard, a guy that would come off the bench, and a similar role that we've seen from a lot of guys coming off the bench, whether it's like over the history of the NBA, Manu or Jason Terry, Jamal Crawford, guys like that, like come in and score. And now he's being asked to do something completely different, balancing his own offense with initiating the team's offense, getting other guys involved, and again, specifically working the 2-man game with Barnes. And that's why I think, like, that to me is coming along slower than I think most people would have hoped for, the 2-man game with Barnes. And I also see a lot of, like, over-dribbling from him as he's trying to figure out, again, what's the balance between looking for his own and getting everybody else involved. So I'm still on the fence. Like, I think there's a really good player there, and clearly someone, I mean, the Raptors identified it, and so did a lot of other teams around the league, watching him in New York and thinking, okay, well, in an expanded role and a bigger opportunity, this is somebody who has a higher ceiling than what we're seeing now. The question, of course, like long-term for the Raptors is what is that ceiling? And I think that's still to be determined. You mentioned him, and I talked earlier about like him being a number 2 with Scottie. I'm not sure that that's what he is, and I know the team isn't sure about that yet either, even though like they don't have to be. It's still too early for that. In the way that the new CBA is, like it's not, you no longer need 3 guys, at least in the way that you used to, where it was like, the big 3. You don't need 3 superstars. Well, it would be nice to have them, but unless you're Phoenix and you spend all your money on the 3 guys and you have no depth beyond that, even Phoenix, like that was with the previous CBA. I'm not sure how sustainable something like that is. The way things are now, you need 2 stars. And I mean, the Raptors feel pretty confident they've got the one in Scottie, which is not a bad place to be this early in the rebuild. I'm not sure that they have the second in Quickley, but even if he is a number 3 or number 4, it's still not a bad place to be. You just got to figure it out.
Well, what do you think his ceiling looks like? Like he kind of like, I thought of like a poor man's version of Tyrese Maxey, but it's like, I don't know if he can shoot like that. Like, what do you think his ceiling is if he can reach it?
Yeah, that's not a bad one. Because he's dynamic, and you want guys like that, and that's why like so many people, and this is maybe why it's a little bit disappointing that he hasn't developed a 2-man game with Barnes to this point is because you kind of identified him as the type of player that would pair well next to kind of a do-it-all, positionless type of player like Scottie Barnes, where it's kind of like Jonas in Milwaukee, where Jonas a lot of the times is the de facto point guard, even if he's not playing point guard. So who do you actually have playing point guard? It's a guy who can play on the ball, also play off the ball, a guy can shoot, a guy that can get in the lane and break down the defense. And at his best, like that's what it looks like Quickley can be. I think they're just trying to figure out, like, okay, well, how often is he going to be on the ball? How often is he going to be off the ball? And I think the organization is still trying to figure out how to use Scottie Barnes. The great thing about him is he's so unique, but the difficult thing about him is he's so unique. And I'm not sure that they're talking about, that Darko was just talking about how he needs to be posting up more, and they want to use him kind of in that role as a big. But one of the reasons why they traded a guy that we're going to see tonight, Dennis Schroeder, is because they also want him to play point more. So I think they're still trying to figure out what his role looks like, and I think that's going to ultimately determine what Quickley's role looks like.
What is your projection for Kyle Lowry in Philly and, teaming back up with Nick Nurse? How do you see that playing out?
I mean, whether it was Philadelphia and with Nick Nurse or anywhere else, and regardless of what the rest of his career looks like, where he ends up next year, like ultimately this is going to come down to how willing Kyle is to sacrifice and to accept a lesser role. It's something that certainly earlier in his career, I don't think that he was willing or capable of doing, is swallowing his pride and putting his ego aside and saying, all right, well, maybe I'm not the player that I once was. Maybe I'm not going to be playing 35 minutes a game. Maybe I am just coming off the bench and being the veteran guy and the leader and all of that. He seems a little bit more willing to do it, just speaking with him here and there over the last couple of years. But it's easier said than done. And we've seen this over the years with great players, with stars. I mean, I think Carmelo Anthony had a lot of trouble accepting a lesser role towards the end of his career. Somebody like Allen Iverson, never really could, and that ultimately cut his career short. A career that could have been longer if he was willing to do that, but ultimately, depends on what you want the end of your career to look like. So, I think it's going to depend on what the role is too in Philadelphia, because is Kyle going to swallow his pride and turn into Garrett Temple overnight, be the guy that sits at the end of the bench, doesn't play, and just essentially is an extra assistant coach on the bench? No, I don't see that from Kyle Lowry today, tomorrow, or really ever. But if he can find the balance where he's still playing a role, he's still contributing to a winning team, they still value what he brings, even if he's not playing 30-plus minutes a night, I think that's probably the balance. That's probably the sweet spot. And honestly, Philadelphia could use that. They have a need at the position. Assuming they get Joel Embiid back, this is a team that could make a run. And obviously, he's got a friend there in Nick Nurse. I mean, Nurse and Lowry, as long as they were together here, those two always worked really well together, saw the game in the same way, and I know they're excited to have him there.
Well, it's going to be an interesting one tonight. Jacques Vaughn, he's obviously out in Brooklyn. We got a new coach. They're trying to get in. The Raptors, we'll see what comes of it down the stretch. You'll be all over it as always. Enjoy it tonight, and we'll do it again soon. Thank you, Josh.
All right, guys. Take care.
Josh Lewenberg, our Raptors reporter. Yeah, the Nets firing their head coach when they've been terrible, and it's like, what were you expecting? You know, KD's gone, and
I think they signed him to an extension like last year or something.
Well, because when he showed up for Steve Nash, it worked out really well. You know, they had a really good run, and then
sort of.
Well, considering the scenario,
run. Yeah.
I mean, when you consider like KD was like, "Get me out of here," obviously Harden, Kyrie Irving was a disaster. You know, the dust settled, and it was like, yeah, well, they kept playing, and they kept actually doing pretty well. And this year,
some pretty good pieces.
Been disappointing, but I'm not sure what Brooklyn really thought they were getting themselves into this year. Anyway, Raps Nets tonight down at Scotiabank. Maybe tomorrow we got to get into this story about like the pants in Major League Baseball. Have you seen this stuff online?
And the jerseys,
and the jerseys,
none of it looks good.
Because it's Fanatics. I think Nike might still be involved.
Yeah.
And the pants are like see-through pants, which is really concerning. You cannot have see-through pants. Like not to the point where it's like really, really see-through, but like Shohei Ohtani had his team picture that was posted online, and he had his jersey tucked in. You could see the jersey. Like the tuck-in of the jersey. You can't have that. This is Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I read that some players were going to like Dick's Sporting Goods and buying pants.
Right. Like they're outsourcing their own pants. And there's some pictures that are going viral of like guys in like a deep stretch. It's like you can't have that, man. You cannot have a deep stretch pick with pants that are completely unpredictable. You have to have predictable pants. Look at Ohtani. You could see the jersey tuck. That's terrible. This is Major League Baseball.
Well, and baseball jerseys are so iconic. I mean, hockey jerseys the same, but baseball has like a real stature to their uniforms. You know what I mean? Like if you cheapen them, and they actually have been kind of cheapening them in the last few years. You know what I mean? Where they make like the kind of like the spring training uniforms end up making it into the regular season. You're like, that kind of looks crappy. Like I'm thinking of the Red Sox one, which is just like it's like a navy plain crappy jersey, and they have like a cool iconic kind of uniform.
Yeah, the Sox, I mean, exactly. If you're one of those original teams, you don't ever mess with that.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Come back and put a bow on the show. Leafs and Raptors in action tonight. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2. All right, so OverDrive continues, brought to you by FanDuel, and it's been a fun day online, certainly for us, because I wasn't even aware, Jonas, that today was the 8th anniversary of OverDrive, like the establishment of the show, us moving to the afternoons. We were at least lunch prior to this. I didn't know this until Arad, the morning show producer for First Up, sent me a text the other day, said, can you come on for the anniversary? And I'm like, I guess. I would have had no idea it was February 22nd, but I appreciate that update. And then as a result, we posted something online on Twitter, Instagram, and a lot of people have been sending in different kind of favorite moments and, you know, videos and all that kind of stuff. And we appreciate that. And obviously we can't thank people enough for being along for the ride. Whenever you showed up, like I talk to people all the time. Some people say we've been here for 10 years. Others showed up a year ago, a month ago, a week ago, whatever it happens to be. And whenever you jump on board, we appreciate that. But I guess SportsCenter put something together, Doogie, a little SportsCenter Express. So why don't we roll that and look back on 8 years of OverDrive so far? What would the O-Dog's vigilante name be?
To catch the fecal flinger.
Someone tweeting in saying, the constipator, because the crap stops here. You are the constipator.
I can't do it.
Can you imagine this guy running around Toronto as the constipator? This is the most outrageous clip I've ever heard. This is Peter King. This guy's on the Hall of Fame committee.
Yes,
he
play
votes
it,
on
and I'll
MVPs.
explain myself.
Just play it,
Quebec,
and we'll go with it.
You know, doing the work of God. You know, and
Right
I
into
have to
Peter's
explain
yip.
myself.
Go
I have
ahead.
to
What did
explain-
you just do?
I want to apologize to Steph, to J-Mac, everyone at TSN Radio. I'm so embarrassed.
Here we are at a local track. There he is. He's actually moving pretty well. I think I screwed this up. I'm not even close. He is humming around the turn.
Smoke.
Oh my God! I thought I was cooking.
I thought it was.
It felt like I was cooking out there, and I watched that. That looked like a guy walking in the forest on a Sunday afternoon.
You're on Broadway, and the idea of I don't know what's going on with this camera here.
What is Joe? Is Joe from the bridge got his foot on the
Joe, someone check on Joe from the bridge. Is he having?
He's falling asleep back
He's-
there. He's leaning on the up and down button.
Hi. We're up on TV. This is why I always say you got to PVR the show. You got to PVR the show every single day because you have no idea what is gonna end up happening. All right, I like that. All right, thank you to SportsCenter for putting that together. We appreciate it.
I was watching when the RoboCam happened. I was like, well, do they know what's going on there?
We knew. Joe from the bridge. He was on top of it. It happens, right? 8 years. Generally speaking, this is a professional program. One of these
Generally
years, we're going to
speaking.
win a sports on me. I know it. It's going to happen at some point. All right. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes for helping out. We appreciate it. Everyone for tuning in. TV, radio, podcast, web. We appreciate that. Great seeing you, Jonas, as
Good
always.
seeing you. Good luck staying up.
Thank you. Jonas Siegel of The Athletic. Bryan Hayes, we're out of here. Enjoy your evenings. Enjoy the games tonight. We're back tomorrow at 4 p.m. We'll chat then.